When I first picked up this single cab step-side Silverado back in August of 2021, it was sitting at a factory ride height, but I knew ultimately it would be an all-wheel drive street machine, so I wanted to have it sitting just a little bit lower than factory. One of the very first things that we did was drop the rear suspension by removing the factory four-wheel drive lift block and installing a little bit longer drop shackle to bring the rear end down by about 3 inches. And we dropped the front by installing some 2500 HD stock torsion bar keys. Now, just about a week ago, I installed some 2014 Silverado 18-inch wheels with a 265 60/18 tire, and I love the look. But on the back, it is just a little bit too tall for my taste. It kind of looks like a stock two-wheel drive. So today, we're going to fix that by lowering the rear end down about 2 more inches. I got a bit of a head start on today's job just by getting the bed removed. It's sitting outside. And most of what we're going to be doing revolves around these drop hangers right here. This will raise the front of the leaf spring on the frame, which is going to lower the truck by about 2 more inches. And then we're also going to be doing a Atomic Fab rear shock kit with some Viking double adjustables, just like we did on the extended cab, which means we got to chop a few brackets off both the frame and the axle. We'll get the new brackets welded on, and then I'm also going to be doing a Hellwig rear sway bar, which once again was on the extended cab. And kind of long term, this is going to be like not like an autocross truck, but it's going to be more of like a pro touring handling type build, where the extended cab truck is definitely like the drag build, because that's going to have a big giant big block with about 1500 horsepower. That's kind of like my goal. Where I think long term, this one here is probably going to be maxed out at like 700 or 750 horse. This one's going to be all-wheel drive, that one's going to be two-wheel drive. So I just kind of want to do this one a little bit differently, and a lot of the parts that I've already bought, they're going to work on this truck as well. So we're going lower today. We're going to tighten up the handling with the sway bar, and then of course we're going to be improving the ride quality with those Viking shocks. The one thing I'm not going to be doing today is touching any of this frame with like paint or a wire wheel or anything like that. I do kind of like how it looks on the ugly truck where everything is all painted up, but it's a fair amount of work to do that, and in my opinion, it's still a bit of a half-assed job, because it's like I use just a regular generic spray paint instead of an epoxy, and I've only done like half of the frame, where everything underneath the cab hasn't been touched. The front suspension, like I haven't been able to access any of that stuff to put a coating on there, where in my opinion, the proper way to do that is completely blow the truck apart. And I think the step side, I do want this to be not like a show truck, but I want it to be a little bit nicer. So I'll probably end up painting this at some point. So when I get to that point, I think what I'm going to do is take the cab off, take the drivetrain out, completely strip this thing down to a bare set of frame rails, and then we'll have it sandblasted and powder coated. And then, you know, once we do the paint, we might do a color change. I don't know. But at that point, we'll address all the rust and stuff like that. So for today, as much as I'd like to, we're not touching the frame. We're just going to be doing the suspension work. And then we'll keep driving the truck, because the power adder that we have ordered should be here within the next week or two. So I'm really excited about that, and I don't want to turn this into a project where the entire thing is blown apart for a month or two. Long-term plans for the front suspension, we do have some Atomic Fab coilovers. I'll probably put some bigger brakes on it, maybe like those 2020 Silverado, like the big old massive, I think they're like 14 or 15 inch rotors and like 4 piston calipers. Those will adapt fairly easily to these trucks. But anyway, that's like long term. Today, let's just focus on the rear suspension. So let's start by tearing it down. So we got most of the dirty work done. We have the new hangers bolted onto the frame. All the old brackets are cut off, and we're pretty much ready to start getting things put back together. But there is one thing I took care of, which I haven't shown you guys yet. That's the brake hard line. As you can see, like there's a good clean spot right here, but as it went along this area in between the fuel tank and the frame, it gets really, really rusty, but then it gets kind of clean again. There's a little rust spot, but this is like a major safety issue. I don't think these were bad enough where they were going to burst anytime soon, but it was to the point where I'm like, I have the truck apart. This has to be fixed right now. It's a safety thing. You don't want to be driving down the road or on a racetrack and then go to stand on the brakes and then you have a line blowout. It's major trouble. So anyway, we got that replaced. I've seen this before on a lot of these trucks, but this area right here in between the fuel tank and the frame rail, the brake lines rust for whatever reason. But like I said, I've got a good clean spot right there on the original hard line. I put a flare union in, and then we just replaced it all the way back here to the flex line. So we got one brand new piece of brake line. I put a few little short sections of this silicone hose just to kind of protect it from, rubbing on metal or anything like that. And we're kind of clipped back into the original clips there on the frame rail. So safety issue taken care of. We have the new hangers bolted onto the frame. And then it does turn out that this is going to lower the truck a little bit more than I had originally anticipated. Now, when you install like a drop shackle, for example, if the drop shackle is 3 inches longer than stock, because the axle sits like halfway in the middle of the leaf spring, 3 inches longer up here without moving the front translates into 1.5 inches of drop. Now, on the front spring hangers that we have bolted onto the frame, I traced both of them out on this little piece of cardboard. And the new drop hanger mount is 6 1/8 inches higher than it was before, which means we're going to get 3 1/16 of an inch drop, which is kind of more than I was hoping for. I originally wanted to be roughly 2 inches lower out back than we were before. So to kind of offset that just a little bit, I installed my Belltech drop shackles instead of these eBay ones. The center to center on the outside hole was the same, but on the eBay shackles, these two holes are pretty close together, where on the Belltech ones, they're a little bit further apart. So by moving down to the lower hole, we will raise the truck up by about 11/16 of an inch. And so overall, from where we were before with the bolt on the shackle a little bit lower and the front quite a bit higher, we're going to be 2 3/8 of an inch lower out back than we were before. Not a huge deal. I can easily adjust. I think all I got to do now is go down about 1/2 inch on the front to kind of match where I want to be roughly perfectly level. Now, the problem with lowering a truck like this, especially when you use like a Belltech hanger that moves the front so far up, is that's going to have a negative impact on your pinion angle. When you lower a truck, say stock hanger up front and a longer shackle, well, that's fine because it makes the pinion point down a little bit as the rear, raises up, which is kind of what you want, because under acceleration, that pinion is going to want to climb up and you don't want that angle to get too positive. But now we have the front hanger that's been raised about 6 inches, and yeah, we did lower the back, so that's going to make the pinion angle quite a bit more positive than it was before. Now, when I had this set up in the ugly truck, I ended up having to put a shim in between the axle and the spring pack, and I think this is that was a 4-degree shim, and that's a steel shim. I like those a lot better than like the cast aluminum ones that come with the kit. You can see that one kind of bolted in there already. I think it's a 4-degree shim, and you put this thick side to the front, and that's going to kind of roll the pinion back down a little bit, which will help offset the amount that it raised by moving the front of the leaf spring. I don't know if it's quite enough just yet, but the only way to find out is, once we get the bed on the truck and the thing put back together, we'll just go for a drive and see if we have any excessive vibrations. And if we do, I'll put the angle finder on there, but more than likely I'll need a steeper, instead of like a 4, maybe a 6 or even an 8-degree pinion shim to get that pinion kind of pointed downhill a little bit. But we'll figure that out once we get the truck out on the road. Other than that, basically we're ready to get this thing put back together, get the shock mounts welded on, put the bed back on the truck. Well, we're making pretty good headway. We have the upper shock mounts welded onto the cross member. Everything's cooled down, and really all we have left to do is get the lower shock brackets welded onto the axle, install the sway bar, and then splash a little bit of paint on some of those areas that we did some grinding. And then this project is pretty much done with our quote-unquote pro touring suspension makeover for the rear end of the step side. The one thing that's pretty important when you're setting up rear shocks is you got to make sure that the suspension is sort of at its final ride height, because that's what dictates where the shock is going to be in its travel. And this actually worked out perfectly last time I did this on the extended cab. So all I did was take the four wheels and tires from the AT4 HD and I just kind of stacked them up, and I kind of try to evenly distribute them front to back, because that's, you know, the bed. This one has the bumper and the receiver hitch on it, which the extended cab did not. And I think the step side bed is just a little bit heavier anyway. So this should be just about perfect, or at least close enough to get the shock mounts kind of dialed in. When I did install the upper shock mounts here, I kind of took some measurements, and if it all works out like I think it will, the little U-bolts that hold the upper sway bar end link brackets to this cross member should fit perfectly in the middle of those brackets right there. So as you can see on this guy, this attaches to the axle, this attaches to that cross member, and there's a U-bolt right here. So anyway, that should go right in between the upper shock mounts. And because of the way that the sway bar kind of kicks in, I think the shocks will run like, it'll be close, but they should be like right there. So nothing should touch, and we'll have a great double adjustable shock and a rear sway bar. And of course up front, eventually we will get the coilovers, and I'll put a stiffer sway bar up front as well. But for now, we're just focusing on the rear suspension. So anyway, if you remember, once again, we are using a kit from Atomic Fabrication and Performance. I will link that in the description. These are his upper brackets there. The lower brackets I have attached to the shock. This is a Viking double adjustable. Taped it up just to prevent any sort of weld splatter from damaging the aluminum body or the shaft of the shock. So we'll get these bad boys tacked in place. The suspension install is 100% complete, and I've got the truck sitting on jack stands at approximately the final ride height. And the only two things that we have left to do are bleed the brakes and throw the bed back on. But I'm actually going to wait to put the bed on until next week, because I do have a fuel pump coming, and I just want to get that install knocked out while the bed is still removed from the truck. I am going to be going with a Walbro 450. That's the same pump I'm using on the extended cab, and it works great with a big block up to like 14 pounds of boost, and it doesn't drop fuel pressure or anything like that, even on that higher boost level. So that's going to be a little bit more horsepower than we're going to be running with this truck at first with the power adder. So 450 Walbro will be perfect. I'm also going to be installing a Racetronic hot wire kit and just the few other little wiring accessories that they have. So we'll have plenty of fuel delivery for the power adder, which hopefully should be here hopefully by early February. They told me about a month, maybe 6 weeks or so. We ordered it like the 1st of January. Anyway, as far as the suspension install goes, also really pleased with how that turned out. The upper shock mounts, that was kind of like I did on the other truck. The sway bar lined up just about perfectly. We got the little U-bolt thing right there in between the two upper shock mounts. Although I do wish, after seeing this installed, I do wish that I would have moved these upper mounts out just a hair, probably 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch per side. It would have still lined up with that little U-bolt thingy, but it would have given me a little bit more clearance kind of down here between the shock and the sway bar. I don't think it's ever going to give me problems. I can get my whole hand in between there. The only thing I was kind of worried about is the little adjustment knobs there. Like, let's say I'm on a track or something doing an autocross and that sway bar somehow gets pushed side to side. I suppose it could, in theory, contact that little adjuster if it got into the right situation, but the adjuster is a little bit lower than the sway bar. And I don't think it'll ever be a problem, but I'm like, if I had to do it all over again, I could have easily gotten another 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch of clearance. So, but anyway, I think it's just fine. And with the changes that we've done, we have a lower ride height, we have improved handling, and we have a better ride quality. So I'm really excited to get the truck out on the road. I did want to give you guys some notes on the drive line. I checked all the angles, and I think we're actually going to be okay on this one. Kind of how it turned out. We have the transmission going down by 4.9 degrees, drive shaft still down, but not quite as much, 1.2 degrees, and then the differential down 3.4 degrees, which gives us operating angles of 2.2 and 3.7. Now, the important thing here, normally when you see driveline diagrams for like an ideal situation, it looks kind of like this, where you have a flat-ish engine, downhill drive shaft, and then, sort of flat-ish differential. But the important thing is that the angles are opposite one another, which is exactly what we have here, except that it's opposite of this case. So you can see the acute side of the angle is on the bottom and then on the top, where here it's on the top and then on the bottom. But I did read a couple of articles that said as long as these angles are opposite and your operating angles are less than about 4 degrees, you should be good. I think I'd like to maybe shim the back of the transmission up just a little bit to lower this angle here. But we're going to try it for now and see how it does, because I don't know how much room I actually have to push the transmission, the transfer case up, but we'll give it a shot, because even if I improve that angle by a little bit, it's probably going to help. And those are like the only two changes that we can make. We can either raise or lower the differential. That's a ride height change. So I don't want to make any further changes there, which means I can either lower the front of the engine or raise the rear of it. And definitely raising the rear is kind of the only or the simplest option. But anyway, I did just get my gears in yesterday for the front differential, so we're going to match the all-wheel drive diff I have with 430s. And then as soon as that's done, we can do all-wheel drive or the power adder. I'm not sure, kind of depends on which one gets here first. I'd love to put the power adder on first while it's still, two-wheel drive, so we can do some shenanigans like I like to do. But anyway, that's for another day. Thank you guys for watching. I do appreciate it. Click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. LS Fest West, they just announced the dates. It's April 22nd, 3rd, and 4th in Las Vegas. I am going to try to have the step side down there for the event, and hopefully by the time the event does roll around in April, we'll have the power adder installed, we'll have the all-wheel drive conversion done, and maybe a few other little cool odds and ends. So I want to take the truck out on the drag strip, and I want to do autocrossing. So look forward to that, April 22nd, 3rd, and 4th in Las Vegas. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you again soon.